Hi all, welcome to this webinar on 4 KFS mistakes that led to RBI fines and how to fix them. I'm Aditya, Head of Marketing at Legality and a former lawyer who's dealt with banking compliance issues. I'm joined today by Shubhesh, our Product Marketing Lead. So this showcase will be split into 3 parts. In the first part, we will be analyzing the 4 KFS mistakes in detail and telling you how to fix them. This will take about 25 minutes and it's the real meat of the webinar. In the second part, we'll show you a demo of a fully compliant digital KFS process to give you an idea of how exactly the flow would work and to showcase how legality can actually help you. This will take about 10 to 12 minutes to cover. And finally, we'll be throwing open the floor for an open Q&A. This will take as much time as the questions you ask. The last KFS webinar we did, I think we spent half an hour on the open Q&A because there were that many questions. So a few house rules. As I mentioned, the core showcase will be about 25 minutes plus the demo of about 10 minutes. So we'll be done with our part in about 35 minutes max. But if you have any questions in the middle of it about anything we're saying, please ask in the Q&A box below. We'll either take them up in the middle if it's relevant to something we're talking about at that moment or at the end. We'll anyway open the mic access at the end in the open Q&A section. And second, a recording of this webinar will be sent to you within 48 hours, probably earlier. So don't worry if you have to drop off midway or if any of your colleagues have missed it. We'll be sending you the recording. KFS was introduced purely for the benefit of the borrower, right? And it's super important for all lenders to remember this. Any understanding of KFS operational requirements that we'll be discussing must internalize this single idea. On screen right now, you will see real life examples which illustrate exactly why KFS was introduced, right? It was made purely for the benefit of the borrower, to maximize transparency, to eliminate the possibility of unilateral changes by lenders, and to actually empower the borrower to push back on the lender in case of any unilateral changes. And RBI continues to insist on KFS. You will all be familiar with the master KFS guidelines released last year. RBI has just reinforced these guidelines with every subsequent guideline, especially in the new digital lending directions, which were passed just a few weeks back, right? And so the KFS guidelines last year introduced 7 operational requirements for lenders, which are currently displayed on screen. I won't go through all of them, although we'll cover some of them during the course of the showcase. We had done a full 1 hour session on these exact operational requirements. The link to this recording is below. You can just scan the QR code. And of course, we'll send you this deck so you can scan it at your leisure when we send you this deck. So with this brief context out of the way, and this context will be very important to what we're discussing, right? With this brief context out of the way, let's dive into the subject of the webinar, right? So RBI in the past 12 months has imposed 14 fines for various things, right? But out of these fines, 4 could have been prevented with proper KFS compliance. One fine was imposed on an MFI for failing to provide a KFS to borrowers. One fine was for an NBFC that did not explain the interest rate terms to the borrower properly. A third fine was imposed on an NBFC because they didn't disclose co-lending arrangements to the borrower. And a fourth fine was imposed because KFS was not in the vernacular language. So we crystallized these 4 fact situations, these 4 fines, these 4 violations, whatever you want to call it, into 4 operational mistakes that these lenders made. All of these operational mistakes ultimately lead to the KFS. All of them can only be fixed through the KFS, right? Mistake 1 was a result of a failure to provide KFS. Mistake 2 was a result of not including the computation sheet of APR and amortization schedule as part of the KFS. Mistake 3 was incorrect or missing details in the KFS. And mistake 4 was not translating the KFS into a vernacular language. We'll tell you exactly how to solve this, and we'll give you operational ways and operational techniques that you can use to actually technically solve this in your flows. So let's dive into these analysis of these mistakes one by one. So let's come to mistake 1, which is the most obvious, not providing the KFS, right? And for most people on this call, this will be the simplest requirement to understand. So we won't spend too much time on it, but let's dive in a bit, right? Because the RBI KFS rules are crystal clear. You have to provide KFS if your loan product falls under the KFS guidelines. So how do you ultimately fix the mistake? It's very simple. If your loan product is under the ambit of the KFS guidelines, then you have to provide a KFS and a loan kit. Just a loan kit during disbursal will not be enough. But really understanding and true compliance with this, even though it seems very simple at a theoretical level, requires understanding the key question. When does a loan product or kit fall under the ambit of KFS? So we prepared this helpful chart for you. If your loan product is an MSME term loan or a retail term loan, then you are under the ambit of KFS. If your product is a credit card product, then you are not under the ambit of KFS. We have a third line here of probably not, which is for credit line products. And we have put it in this probably not bucket because in our view, a credit line product fundamentally differs from a term loan, right? A term loan is an amount disbursed, given to the borrower, which they have to pay back in time with interest over a term. Whereas a credit line, and I know most of you will be familiar with this, but a credit line is ultimately a facility offered without an amount being disbursed, right? The borrower can draw down that facility how much ever they want. They don't even have to touch it if they don't want to. And the RBI KFS guidelines specifically mention retail and MSME term loans. The specific term loan is used, right? So in our view, credit line would not be under this ambit. However, the reason I put it under probably not is because in our experience working with lenders, we have seen a few lenders actively evaluate including a KFS even for credit line products, just out of abundant caution, right? Credit line on UPI, credit line, just an MSME credit line, overdraft facility. They've included a KFS or seriously evaluated and probably implemented KFS for these products out of abundant caution. So ultimately, the decision for this lies with your compliance team, right? We can only give you what we are sure of, which is MSME and retail term loans, and what we think, but you need to confirm with your compliance team, or as a compliance team, you need to take this call, right? What do you classify as a retail and MSME term loan? You need to figure that out. If it's classified as a MSME or retail term loan, you need a KFS, right? Just a rule of thumb, if you're in doubt, simply include a KFS, right? Like whenever there's an inkling of doubt, the RBI is not going to penalize you for extra transparency. So that's mistake one, which is the most obvious one. Mistake number two, not including a computation sheet of APR and amortization schedule. So if you look at clause 6 of the KFS rules, they are quite clear. The KFS must include a computation sheet of APR and the amortization schedule of the loan. And RBI has in fact given illustrative templates, not mandatory templates, but illustrative templates in Annexure B and C of the guidelines. So this RBI fine in this case, if you recall correctly, the fact situation in this case, the RBI fine was specifically for failure to explain interest rate, right? They did not mention you did not provide APR or amortization schedule. They said you are fined for failure to explain interest rate to the borrower, right? But if you look at the amortization schedule and computation sheet of APR, they do exactly this, right? They detail out in a very granular way exactly how the interest rate and other calculations work, right? While KFS mentions the top level numbers, what is the final interest rate and things like that, the amortization schedule and computation sheet of APR actually explain how these numbers will function and how they will actually practically play out, right? So to prevent this violation from being flagged, make sure that clause 6 of the rules are complied with, that the APR computation sheet and the amortization schedule are attached with KFS. Some lenders neglect these two documents because A, they are supplementary to KFS, or there is operational friction in preparing these documents. But the KFS rules are crystal clear. A KFS kit, right? A KFS is actually not just the template that RBI has given under Annex. KFS kit also needs an APR computation sheet and an amortization schedule in order to be fully compliant. So one question which I want to reiterate again, the RBI fine was for explaining the interest rate. So one question is ultimately, will simply attaching these documents be deemed as compliance, right? Will it be deemed as explaining? So yes, simply attaching these documents at the end may not be enough. But if you recall, the RBI also requires a borrower acknowledgement on the KFS. So what you can do is ensure that the borrower acknowledgement on the KFS, which includes the explanation under APR and computation sheet, you can ensure that acknowledgement is properly and easily verifiable. Because getting the KFS with amortization schedule and computation sheet of APR acknowledged by something, say like an e-sign, would make it much easier for you to prove that the borrower was aware because they've signed off on it. Because if they've signed off on it, it's very hard for them to turn back and say, I was not aware or not, this was not explained to me. Of course, here then this hinges on ultimately the mode of acknowledgement that you're collecting from the borrower, right? If you're doing a physical KFS flow, it's obvious there's only one mode, which is a wet ink signature. But in a digital flow, you have a lot of options. So how do you actually decide, right? If you do a simple click wrap with the KFS, and you've seen this often, right? With a click wrap saying I accept, and the KFS is simply hidden behind a link, then this may not actually help you to prove that the borrower understood things like the interest rate, right? Because the KFS and everything else was buried behind a link with a click wrap that's not verifiable or auditable, right? So here you may want to choose a more secure method, right? So on the other end of the spectrum, you have something like an Aadhaar e-sign, which is of course the most secure type, right? It even has a presumption of validity under the new Indian Evidence Act, where the borrower is presumed to have signed with intent if their signature is placed on the document. So it's even easier to prove with something like an Aadhaar e-sign. Of course, in KFS flows, what we've seen with lenders is that an Aadhaar e-sign is usually reserved for the loan agreement. Lenders don't want to have Aadhaar e-sign twice in the flow, right? In which case, what we've seen lenders do is lenders often opt for many middle ground options of digital acknowledgement, which balance compliance with convenience. Say a virtual signature, either with an OTP on it or even without an OTP that just generates an audit trail. We'll show you exactly how these options look in the demo. Another frequent question actually, so that's the first question, like how do you actually ensure the evidentiary value of the APR being attached? But another frequent question we receive when we bring up these two requirements is the term of the loan sometimes changes between the time of sanction and disbursement. So how can I show all values when I first show the KFS? So for digital loans, app-driven loans, this is not an issue because it's instantaneous disbursement in the same flow. But for other retail loan products and MSME loan products, there is a time gap between sanction and disbursement. So what's important to understand, right, in this, and this is that the new KFS guidelines fundamentally reposition the KFS. So earlier, something like the KFS was only shown at the stage of disbursal as a kind of disbursal formality. Now the RBI actually wants you to show the KFS at the time of offer. So that all the terms and conditions must be crystallized at this stage itself. There's no scope for wavering, right? This will be more inconvenient for you. This will add friction for you. But remember what we started this webinar with, right? The KFS was introduced purely for the benefit of the borrower. There is no concept of lender convenience envisaged with these guidelines. The RBI actually actively wants to create friction for lenders so that borrower transparency is ensured, right? So the changes in process you have to make to comply with this may be a pain for many of you, but this pain is exactly what the RBI wants, right? I think most people, 99% of people on this call, all the people on this call will actually make this effort, undergo this friction, undergo this pain and comply. But there are several fly-by-night loan operators who won't bother or are not able to comply because their model hinges on this unilateral change or this discrepancy, right? They will be filtered out of the system. And RBI thinks that this filtration is worth the operational cost that this requirement imposes on you. Another supplement to this question, of course, is that, look, everything is the same, just the date changes, right, between sanction and disbursement, and that's not really a material change. If you see the KFS itself, and if you see the computation sheet of APR and the amortization schedule, these are illustrative documents. You're supposed to give the borrower the logic of how it will be calculated. So the date change is actually immaterial to the actual contents that you're disclosing here, right? So the date of disbursement varying won't materially change the KFS itself, but just in case, you can get a fresh acknowledgement at the time of disbursal as well, out of abundant caution if you have any doubts. So we're two down. The third mistake is, of course, incorrect or missing details in KFS. And we've received one question actually when we were discussing this. Azima, if you can just go to the previous slide again, that what happens if we are taking KFS and loan agreement in the same kit, right? So what I've told you so far is ultimately where you collect KFS acknowledgement first, and then you finish that process, and then you collect loan agreement e-sign later, right? There are some lenders who, of course, collect both at once. Many lenders don't. Many lenders believe that you have to collect the acknowledgement first, finish that process, then collect the e-sign. We're not going to get into the merits of either process. But of course, if you simply take the sign on the KFS and the loan agreement together, then the date discrepancy issue won't apply to you. Just ensure that the APR and computation sheet are included in that final loan kit. Of course, we're not going to comment on the merits of unifying the KFS and loan agreement sign or separating it. Although we usually recommend to lenders that you should collect one more basic acknowledgement, not an Aadhaar e-sign, but a more basic acknowledgement of finish that and then do e-sign. We have seen lenders do them together. I'm not going to get into that. That's like the subject of a whole different webinar. But happy to take questions and discuss this after this session as well. So now we're two more mistakes to go. The third mistake ultimately is incorrect or missing details in KFS. So in this fact situation, just to recall, the RBI imposed a fine on this NBFC because they did not disclose the co-lending arrangement to the borrower, right? Now, this violation would have been flagged or would not have been flagged, would actually have been prevented if the NBFC had properly filled in the KFS. Because the KFS, and we've given a snippet of the RBI KFS template under Annexure A here, the KFS specifically has a field for this, right? In this example, it's of course this disclosure of co-lending arrangements, but in other cases, it could be another disclosure that you miss out on, right? The basic point is you will need to ensure that the KFS is properly filled in. And therefore, to comply, you will need to ensure proper checks are in place, either automated or manual, to ensure proper information and mandatory fields are filled in the KFS. So how do these checks happen? These checks can happen in two different ways. And there's an interplay between two core pieces of software that we've seen lenders use. One is, of course, the LOS LMS, and one is the document execution platform where you're collecting, say, an e-sign. So one flow is when the LOS LMS itself generates the final KFS, right? So it takes the data and populates the data on the KFS and then generates the final PDF, which is passed on to the document execution process, whether physical or digital, and then go like that process happens with the signer, right? So here you will need a check built in your LOS LMS, which is generating the final PDF, where the creation of KFS is not permitted unless certain mandatory fields are filled in, right? The second flow, which is prevalent in a digital KFS process, is where the LOS LMS passes data to the document execution platform. The document execution platform fills the KFS template and generates the KFS. Here you need the platform template to have a validation check, which does not allow the flow to proceed if a mandatory field is not filled in, right? In some cases, you may also have the ability. So for higher value loan agreements, we've often seen lenders insert a manual reviewer, right, in the KFS process at the document execution stage, right? Whereas there's a manual review process to manually sign off in a digital way. So just Azima, if you can go to 26 again and then come back to 27. So there's two things you need to remember, right? If you're doing KFS generation on the LOS, you need the validation check at the LOS stage. If you're doing the KFS generation on the document execution platform stage, you need that validation check at the document execution platform stage. And if you want a manual reviewer, you need that to happen in one of these stages. Right? So now on to the final mistake. KFS not being translated in a vernacular language. And the RBI directly fined the NBFC in this case for this specific mistake. So the vernacular declaration, right? And we've shown an example of this on screen right now, is familiar to most of you on this call, right? For years, it's been used by many as the primary method of ensuring that vernacular requirements are met, right? And the thinking is obviously that if the borrower signs off on this declaration, that you are absolved of the requirement of providing the rest of it in a vernacular language. But the KFS, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, the KFS rules are quite clear. The KFS must be written in a vernacular language. This means that a vernacular declaration is not enough because a vernacular declaration is not a KFS, right? The KFS itself must be in a vernacular language. There's no other gray way to read this. It's black and white. And so the solution is simply to offer the KFS in a vernacular language. But then the question, of course, is how do you know what language to offer it in, since most of you have operations across India? So one thing you can do, and this is relevant for physical KFS flows or even digital ones, maybe where you have certain branches, like a branch-led operation, is depending on where your branch is located, you can prepare and keep KFS templates for commonly spoken languages in those regions and locations. But of course, if you say are a digital lending app and you don't have branches, technically anyone anywhere can download your app, right? Similarly, if you're a branch in say a large metro like Bangalore or Bombay, different borrowers could have many different language requirements. There's no way to actually guess when they walk in through the door, right? So how do you actually ensure compliance in this case? For this, ultimately, you will need to give customers the option to select the language, something that we think is only truly possible in a digital KFS flow, right? So in a digital KFS flow, what you do is first you, in the backend, so the first stage is a backend stage, you configure separate workflows for each language of KFS that you want to offer, right? Again, in a branch-led flow, you can confine those languages to the states you operate in. In a purely app-led flow, since anyone can access your app, you may want to just add all languages possible, right? That's a call you need to take based on your understanding of your borrower profile. So what you need to do in the backend is basically prepare separate KFS flows, either on the LOS system or on the document execution platform, each assigned to a specific KFS template in a specific language, right? So that's the backend stage. Then on the front end, in your loan flow, you give a language select option, either on the branch officer app or on your consumer app. So let the borrower select, just like in an ATM, you'll be familiar with language select, just like that, right? So then that's the front end interface. So then when they select, the workflow that in the backend you had configured, the workflow tied to that language that they've selected on the front end will be triggered and run. So the correct KFS in the correct language will be displayed, right? But so that's the way to ensure that the KFS itself is in that language, right? But in digital journeys, there's another step, right? Because translating only the document may not actually be enough, right? Because if you look at the spirit of the KFS rules, right, they mention that you have to clearly explain what the KFS says and what to do with it, right? So now in a branch-led flow, honestly, this might be easy because you have staff there to take borrowers through this. They can explain to the borrower in the language of choice. And the KFS, of course, is also displayed in that language, right? But in a remote digital loan, and for digital lenders out there, this is relevant, right? There is no staff there to explain, right? It's a completely automated process. Borrower is completely on their own. So what's the actual issue? Why is this an issue? So if you see the following screenshot, in the process to actually acknowledge a KFS in the e-sign flow, whether you're doing it combined with the loan agreement or separate from the loan agreement, the very process of digital acknowledgement, digital sign, actually has a lot of important information in the interface itself, right? Things like consent, how to proceed, the type of e-sign they will do, right? All this is super critical for the borrower to understand if you want them to be fully informed about the process. So they can't come back and say that I did not know actually what I was doing. I just saw this document in a language I understand, but I didn't know anything else happening, right? So to plug this gap, you ultimately need to offer not just the KFS in a local language, but also the digital interface surrounding the KFS, right? So when the KFS workflow is triggered, ensure that your interface also changes accordingly. Ensure all elements from the consent to the proceed button are displayed in a vernacular language in the interface itself, right? So that's the fourth mistake. And now we've covered the topic of this webinar, all four mistakes that we've seen attract RBI fines. And we've told you briefly how to fix them. We'll of course share this deck with you as well. On this slide, we've summarized it all, the mistake and the compliance requirements, right? Or how exactly to fix them. Mistake one, failure to provide KFS, build and ensure a KFS flow. Mistake two, failure to explain interest rate. You can solve this by ensuring computation sheet of APR and amortization schedule are provided and part of the acknowledgement the borrower gives. Mistake three, failure to fully populate the KFS. Here, ensure a system of checks that ensures mandatory fields are filled in or the process cannot proceed. And mistake four, failure to offer KFS in vernacular. Here, ensure the KFS is in vernacular. And in case of a digital KFS flow, ensure the interface is also in a vernacular. But ultimately, knowing the compliance requirements is one thing. You also need to know how to actually operationally fix these requirements, right? And we believe that to fix this, and naturally, and of course, we do have an interest in this, we believe that a digital KFS process makes it significantly easier to comply than a physical process, right? Because in a digital KFS process, the entire thing is automated, right? Whereas in a physical, you will need to rely on your RM and ground stuff to ensure KFS is given in any transaction. For the requirement 2, in a digital KFS process, you can actually hard code the need for an APR and amortization schedule and ensure it gets filled in and attached, right, at a systemic level. Whereas in a physical process, ultimately, you still need to rely on RM and ground stuff discretion to do this. Similarly, for the third requirement, in a digital KFS process, you can build systemic automated checks that don't allow the process to go ahead if mandatory fields are not filled in. Whereas in a physical process, ultimately, you can only ensure this via a cumbersome manual verification on the ground where you're still relying on discretion. And finally, for vernacular language requirement in a digital KFS process, you can actually ensure availability of this process in every possible language. It's a slightly frictionful one-time configuration, but you can ensure full availability. Whereas in a physical KFS process, the best you can do is take some educated guesses on what language templates you need to have in your branch. There is never 100% fully way to plug in all holes, right? So we'll again share this deck with you so you can have this compliance summary and how to fix it. And ultimately, and now we're coming to the demo section, and we'll then come to Q&A. You can build end-to-end digital KFS flows on legality, right? And you can meet almost every RBI compliance requirement related to the operationalization of KFS all through one platform, legality. Several lenders are already running their flows, many of them on this call. Maybe you're in a different vertical, maybe you're in the same vertical and you just want more clarity, are already running their KFS flows through legality in an RBI compliant way. Many lenders are not mentioned on this, are currently undergoing implementation. And now we'd love to show you exactly how this works. If you came here just for the compliance overview, the next section is going to be a product plug and a legality demo on exactly how we achieve compliant digital KFS journeys. We'll be having an open Q&A after 10 minutes where we'll show you the demo and then we'll do an open Q&A. Before that, so before we come to the demo, I just want to address one question that we've received in the chat and a few questions that we've received in the Q&A box about vernacular language, since that was the last thing I covered, right? So one question, of course, is if, let's say you're giving MSME term, like a term loan for MSME, but you're giving corporate loans, right? Where the entity that you're lending to is not a MSME. It's a corporate loan, non-MSME. Do you need to provide KFS then? In our view, the answer is no, because the KFS guidelines specifically mention MSME term loan. So if the borrower entity is not an individual, is a company that is not an MSME, explicitly not an MSME, we don't think the KFS rules will apply. Second question was, of course, is the vernacular language requirement applicable to corporate lenders? Since the borrowers are company, that's again a call you need to take. We've seen many corporate lenders ultimately say that, look, they all understand English because they have to do MCA filings in English. So it's deemed that they understand English, which I think is a reasonable assumption to make for corporate loans specifically. Second question, of course, is what would be the definition of providing KFS to customer, and a few other operational questions. So I'll quickly cover these three so that we save some time at the end as well. One question is, of course, what is the definition of providing KFS to customer? Does a copy need to be sent to customer in a download format? If you're doing a digital process, we would say yes. Because ultimately the purpose of KFS is even after the terms of the loan, like after the loan is in tenure, the borrower needs to see if you're making any unilateral changes, and they can only see that if they actually have the copy with them. So yes, you need to give the borrower a copy of the KFS in a downloadable format that the borrower can download. Yes. Similarly, do we need to provide vernacular language to a customer for an app-driven loan journey? Since the customer is applying for the loan in English, will English be treated as language understood by customer? We've received this question a lot, right? The rest of my app is in English. Is it deemed to be English? Unfortunately, the RBI KFS rules make no exception, right? So even if the borrower does the entire thing in English, they later say that, look, I only know, say, Kannada or Hindi. Ultimately, the KFS rules are only concerned with the KFS and whether that's in a language understandable by the borrower, right? Because ultimately, the borrower may understand certain interfaces in English, but they may not understand financial terms and transactions in English, right? So you still need to provide the KFS in a language understandable by borrower. And in fact, under the RBI Fair Practice Code, you actually need to ensure all communication to the borrower is in a vernacular. So under that requirement, actually, you need to offer that language choice at the beginning of your interface itself and ensure the entire interface is in a vernacular language. So we've received a few more questions. We'll take them up at the end. We'll quickly do a demo. One question we've received while Shubhash is setting up the demo is that KFS and agreement is in a single document. Is this fine? So this is a wider discussion, which we will take in the end. So these questions are a bit wider. So we'll take them up in about 10 minutes. We'll just move on to the demo first. And for these questions, actually, you'll get mic access also. So we can have an open discussion.
Thanks a lot, Aditya. Okay, so I'm gonna show you guys a quick KFS journey, and followed by that, we will automatically get redirected to a loan agreement. So we're gonna use OTP-less quick sign. It's like a two-step process wherein the person e-signs the KFS quickly, and then, as I said, they'll be taken to the loan agreement. So if you'll see, I've already prepared a e-sign invite and the KFS and sent it on my WhatsApp via legality.
Yeah,
So I'm
but
gonna
important to remember that for digital lenders out there, all of this, you don't need, this is a link sent on WhatsApp. You can also have this direct display on your app, right? This is just one method of ultimately showing the link.
Yeah, you can open the agreement directly within your app. You can also send it on email or even on SMS if you want. So I'm gonna click on e-sign and I'll be redirected to
And
the
this process we're showing you is ultimately, because we've received 2-3 questions which I have not answered yet, is can the KFS be combined with the loan agreement and one e-sign be taken? In our view, the more compliant approach would be the KFS acknowledgement taken first, because ultimately KFS has to be understood before disbursal, right? Before execution of the loan contract, not together with the execution of the loan contract. So if you were to push us for a recommendation, we would of course say the acknowledgement should be separate and then the loan agreement. Some lenders in the market are still combining the two. Ultimately, we would not recommend that, but we know that some lenders are doing that. There is, of course, no specific guidance from the RBI on this specific ambiguity. We've seen many lenders, especially for higher compliance flows, actually separate the two, collect acknowledgement, then collect e-sign. We've seen many lenders, especially in the MFI or digital lending space, combine the two. All right. Can have an open discussion after this. Ultimately, we recommend the approach of separating the two because KFS ultimately has to be understood before execution of the loan contract. So the flow we are showing you is one with a separate flow, but of course a separate but unified flow where the borrower can give the separate acknowledgement, but still sign the loan agreement in the same flow. So you can balance that compliance with a single seamless convenient journey as well.
Yeah. Okay. So as you would see, there's a panel which says choose your language. Here I can select the language of the interface. This is only because I wanted to show you this option. In most journeys, you'll know the language before you even send the KFS. So you can set it by default. So I'll show you how that's also done when we look at the backend. And I'll also show you how I've already done it for the loan agreement when we get to it. So I'm comfortable in English and Hindi. So let's say I want to pursue this in Hindi. So I've selected Hindi and you'll see like the button there, it says Aage Badhe, which is in Hindi. But let's say the person is comfortable in English. So you'll see it's automatically changed and adjusted to say proceed now. And this will carry on for the entire interface till the person e-signs. So I'll just quickly proceed. Actually, no, I wanted to show you the KFS also. So this is the KFS. You'll see it's the template we're using is Hindi. We've pre-filled some dummy data already from this. You can pass this data, as Aditya said, from your LOS LMS, or you can directly create a KFS in your LOS LMS and pass it as a PDF. So I'll proceed. This is the signing screen. I'll quickly sign this. Click on Aage Badhe, give my e-sign consent, and this is literally it. This is a two-click process, and your KFS is signed.
So if you see ultimately, it's a two-click process of acknowledgement. So you may not, we mentioned, right? You may not want to do a click wrap, but you may not want to do an Aadhaar e-sign, which has 3-4 steps. Customer has to take out their Aadhaar. You may want to just have a acknowledgement of KFS that shows up on the document, shows up in an audit trail, but you may not want an Aadhaar e-sign. This is that balance that we were showing you. To this process, which Shubhesh has shown you, which is 2 clicks. You can add clicks if you want more security. You can add an OTP. You can add a face capture. You can add a GPS capture if you want, right? Those options are available to you, but they're options for you ultimately. The core flow is a 2-click process, which shows up in the audit trail, which shows up on the document.
Okay. So now here what I've done is I've made the, just for this demo, I've set it up in a way that until and unless I click on this button which says theek hai, and in English it would say okay, it's not going to go to loan agreement. But if you want, you can also configure it in a way it automatically goes to the loan agreement. So I'll click on this okay. And as you'll see, I've already been taken to the next loan agreement. And here you'll see the button is already in Hindi. It says Aage Badhe. I'll show you how this is done also when I show you the backend of it. So I'll quickly proceed. What I've done here is I've done a GPS capture. If you want, you can geofence it. If the customer is coming to your branch, you can geofence it at your branch so that the signing will not happen if the person is outside your branch. So I'll click on Aage Badhe once I've done the GPS capture. Now here you'll see some instructions for face capture. In face capture, we're going to do two checks. First check would be for liveliness. This is for people for a situation wherein the signer is putting up, let's say, a photo in front of your camera while face capture happens. So it's going to block those attempts and people can't do a fraudulent e-sign. Second check we're going to do is a face match. Let's say there is a few days after the customer has filled application for the loan and when the final loan agreement has been signed, and you want to ensure that the same person who applied for the loan is also signing the loan agreement, what you do is you just upload the photo you must have captured during KYC into legality, and when they're signing, the same photo that they had captured during KYC will be matched against the face capture of the person signing loan agreement, and signing only happens if they match. So I'm just gonna quickly do that. So it failed because my face was not correctly placed. So yeah, as you can see, it's correctly done now. My face was correctly placed. It detected I was actively in front of the camera, and it also matched my face to a photo I had previously uploaded onto legality. So I'll click and proceed. We give four options to do Aadhaar e-sign. I'll just quickly change to English so that everyone can read and get hang of it. So you can do either OTP if people are coming to branch. You can also do then biometric face authentication or even iris-based authentication. For the sake of this demo, I'll do OTP only, and I'll give my e-sign consent and proceed to e-sign the loan agreement. I'll be taken to a Aadhaar e-sign provider screen. There I'll give my e-sign consent again, enter my Aadhaar number. So if you see the buttons and all, they look purple in color, which is very different to normal NSDL screen. That's because you can also set your own branding onto NSDL screen and CDSL screens now with legality. So I need to enter OTP.
And while Shubhesh is entering OTP, the standard Aadhaar e-sign process ultimately is just the Aadhaar e-sign. We showed you geofencing, we showed you face capture, just to give you an idea of the options of security that you can add to the process. Ultimately, they remain options. They are not mandatory options in the Aadhaar e-sign. So depending on your type of loan, you can add those security features.
Okay, so my OTP has been verified. The document will get e-signed. It will just take one more minute. While this is happening, I'll quickly show you the e-signed KFS and the audit trail for it. So this was the KFS we had e-signed, and as you can see, this is my e-sign. The scribble is literally overlapping with the instructions given here, but that's because that's where I place the coordinates. If you want, you can place the same coordinate somewhere here also. So that's up to you. I'm going to show you how to do that when I go into backend also. So just for clarity, this is my e-sign on the KFS.
And fundamentally, we've taken the template directly from Annexure A. Ultimately, the footnotes may not be needed in the final template. The footnotes are clarifications for the REs. But we've taken directly the RBI's template and just put it. But even if you have the footnote, you can ultimately position the signature such that it does not overlap.
Yeah. And this is the audit trail. So audit trail will have logs of each action that I took. So if you would see, I opened it on my iPhone using Chrome Mobile iOS. And if you'll see, it's also captured my e-sign consent that I provided and it's given in Hindi. So there's a full loop of thing wherein you're doing the entire journey in vernacular language, and it is also getting captured in the audit trail in a vernacular language. So you can very easily prove that the person who was availing this loan, who signed the KFS, they understood each and every step of the way and they did it willingly with awareness.
And if you see, we didn't do a very complex sign. We did a two-click sign. Yet it comes in the audit trail, right? So even that seemingly simple sign has an extra compliance layer to it compared to, say, a simple I accept checkbox that you provide. Because the phone on which it's being done, the time at which it is being done, the actual signature appearance, the name of the person attached to it. There's a bunch of things that are reflecting in the audit trail. Of course, you may say that this is still not enough. in which case, of course, you can add things like a specific OTP authentication, you can add a face authentication, you can do many other things as well, right? Those layers you can add depending on your compliance appetite. But even the core simple flow has a level of verifiability that a simple click wrap just does not have. Of course, a touchstone to evaluate is verifiability. So if you believe your process has that verifiability and your compliance team has signed off on it, great. We are showing you one option where it's definitely verifiable with a specific audit trail that is digitally signed by legality, which ensures certain presumptions of validity as well.
Okay. So same, this is my audit trail for the loan agreement. If you'll see, my face capture is also present here, my GPS location is present here, and similarly, my e-sign consent here is in English because if you remember, I had switched my language to English in the middle of the journey. So even if the person is switching languages, let's say they decide a certain language they're not a certain line they're not comfortable in English, they would much rather read that in their vernacular language. They can switch it anytime, and the consent will get captured in that very language. And quickly, just lastly wanted to show you the Aadhaar e-sign we've done on the loan agreement. So yeah, this is the loan agreement Aadhaar e-sign that we've done.
Of course, there's one thing we've not shown you, which is KFS ultimately needs to also be attached to the loan agreement. Via the legality integration, you can ensure that as well. So after the KFS is acknowledged, KFS, it's a one-time configuration where the KFS shows up on as the first page of the loan agreement. For the demo purposes, we've not shown you the full updated loan agreement template, but in a legality integration, you can ensure that happens.
Great. So now I'm going to show you how to do the same thing on the back end, like just the back end of it.
Yeah. We also received one question actually. So we can also show that while you're showing the backend on the dashboard. So one question was ultimately for in legality is only OTP based consent from a customer available for the digital loan journey. So I presume the question was asking about whether it's available through legality. There is a method of doing that where it's OTP and click. We'll show that to you as well very quickly. While Shubhesh is showing, like when Shubhesh is showing configuration, we'll show that as well.
Okay. What do you want me to show, Aditya?
Sorry, no, just go ahead. That question will answer after you show the workflow config.
Cool. So what I've done is I've already configured a one workflow. Workflow is like one-time setting you do for how you want the document to be executed. You decide what template or PDF to be used. You decide how many people need to sign it. You enable, disable different settings onto it. You do everything one time, and next time you want to do it, you just simply run the workflow. Now,
And if you recall, actually, just a callback to something we mentioned in the webinar, right? For local language, ensuring local language, right? We said that you configure different workflows either on the LOS LMS or on the document execution platform. So if you're using legality, you can easily do that here, right? So here it says KFS revised. You can say KFS Hindi, KFS Kannada, KFS Malayalam. You can have those different workflows configured, and that can be your backend configuration, which is tied to a front-end selection option.
Yeah, I'll quickly just make a Hindi KFS just to show how easy it is. I've already have a template for KFS Hindi. We have KFS templates in almost all languages. So if you want, we can literally just put them in your sandbox or legality accounts within minutes. So I've
Correct. If
selected this.
you already have a legality account, we do have the vernacular templates available. We've translated RBI's Annexure A vernacular, and we have about 12 vernacular templates available. So please do reach out to us, and we'll share that with you if you are a legality customer or are evaluating and sandboxing legality. We'll add it to your account.
Yeah. So first step is just literally creating your template or telling legality what document you want to use. I've selected this template. If you'll see, this is Hindi KFS. This is the same document that I had used in the demo also. I'll click on next. So every time this workflow will be run, the same template will get used. Now on this screen, I can configure whatever number of invitees I want to add. KFS, I want to just have one signer for this now. Now this icon, this is the vernacular language icon. And if you remember, I told you that either you can set the language or you can give the person to option to select the language. So this was the option that you saw for KFS. If you remember, this screen was the first screen you must have seen on my phone. So people can select the language. This is usually useful. You're working in a demo geography wherein a person may be speaking multiple languages and you're not too sure about it, which language they would prefer. So you can give that option. But if you know what language they would prefer and they're selecting beforehand, the way we showed you during the presentation, you can just select that language. So this is a Hindi KFS. So I select Hindi because I know That is one language for sure this customer is gonna know. Now, if you want, you can select whatever e-signature type you want to use. QuickSign for this, the sign I showed you. With this, you get two options. Either you can scribble your signature or you can select the font of your signature. I save that and it's done. If you want, you can enable security features. These are the features you must have seen during the low.
Yeah. So just to be clear here, like what Shubhesh showed you as the demo, what we're showing you here, which seems to be going very quickly, actually is actually setting up that demo. So let's say Shubhesh was a new customer, new loan product, and he logged into Legality with zero workflows. What he's showing you that's taking a few clicks is actually setting up that workflow. There's no tech team involvement. There's no IT team involvement needed at this stage to actually set up the workflow.
Even like after setting up also, like you can easily download the payload also yourself and just give it off to your tech team who will configure it within a.
Yeah, we'll show you that now shortly.
I'll show you that also. I don't want to enable any security features on for the KFS, but if you want, you can do the GPS capture, you can do liveliness match, you can do face match. But I'll just disable everything and I'll just click on save and I'll click on next because one invitee with simple quick sign is all I need for the KFS for the sake of this demo. And this is the finalized screen. Here you can set the coordinates for your e-sign to come. So by default, it comes here. If you want, you can just place it here and just copy it to all pages.
And you can ultimately not reject all. You can just one time configure all this. You can also pass on the coordinates. So once you save it, your workflow is ultimately configured and you can run this workflow. You can download the payload if you go via API, or you can just go here.
So
you
this
can
is
ultimately download the payload.
Yeah, this is my workflow. I want to, let's say, integrate it. I'll click on these three things, three dots, and I'll just click on this download API payload. That's it. You just need to give this payload to your team now.
So one quick question that we'll answer. So that's how do you actually configure the KFS workflow, right? It's a super easy setup. We did it in 3 minutes. You may want to spend some more time on it, but the point is you can do it on the dashboard on your laptop. That's it. And then you get the payload, you simply pass it on to your team. If you want to edit this flow, let's say you want to edit it, it's live for 1 month, you want to edit something, it's very easy. You don't need to go back to your IT team. You simply go into the workflow, edit it, and you can go into the workflow, edit, choose what to edit, and you can just go there and directly, let's say you want to add authorized signatures and you can add it, right? So this editing, which you usually have to do at the code level, you can actually do at the dashboard level. Your code will automatically reflect it because it's a smart API. Subhash, if you just quickly go back to the invitee configuration. So there's one question we received on if OTP based consent is available. So if you go to invitee config, we do have that available as well, right? So if you go to signature type, instead of selecting quick sign, you can select virtual sign options where you ultimately this virtual sign has an OTP layer to it. You can have OTP layer and an auto-generated sign. So ultimately they enter an OTP and they click on their generated sign and it's affixed. I won't show you the demo. Happy to show you offline because we have a lot of questions to get through. But yes, short answer is it is possible. Great. So we have about 6 questions to get through in the Q&A box. And maybe more if you want to raise your hand and ask. I'll get through the 6 questions in the Q&A box. The meeting is about to end, but the meeting, we will extend it. That's not a problem. So if you have time, we will be on call as long as it takes to answer all the questions. So yeah, I think we did my timelines. I promised at the beginning, we overrun them. Apologies for that, but I hope it was worth it. So we'll quickly answer questions. Before that, ultimately, if you want to, so Azima, if you can go to the next slide. If you want to discuss things with us offline, so you go up, sorry. So one is ultimately we are coming up with a detailed playbook sometime in the first week of August, a step-by-step guide to compliance with actual technical guidance, detailed implementation guidance, legal analysis of the KFS guidelines, frequently asked questions, and vernacular KFS language templates. All of it, right? Way more detail than this webinar, and than we can ever be in a webinar. We are going to release it in about a month or so. If you want early access to it, you can sign up to our WhatsApp and email list, where weekly we send a message which once a week only. We don't spam your inbox with relevant regulatory updates, latest product updates, or case studies from other lenders, right? So you can sign up for this. In the meanwhile, you'll receive once every week or once every 2 weeks a very simple, useful message, or we hope it's useful, and you'll get early access to the playbook. We'll share this deck with you. We'll share this QR code again with you. And of course, if you want to contact us for discussing any of these things offline, you can do that as well. We'll drop my contact coordinates in the chat box. And if you can go to the next slide as well. Oh, this is the last one. No, the next slide. Okay, this is the last one. Cool. I'll drop my contact coordinates in the chat box. So let's come to questions. There's a lot of questions. There's an AI generated summary also. Thanks for that. Will help us. I think there's one question. Someone raised their hand. So if you raised your hand, please raise it again. So I'll give you mic access. Then you can ask your question verbally. And then I'll come to the Q&A questions. 1 second. I see you. 1 second. Yes. Hi, Shiva. And I think you had 3 questions also. So you are given mic access. So we can also cover 3 questions that you asked. I think they were revolving around one thing. You can unmute and actually re-ask your question for the benefit of the audience. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, Shiva, it's perfectly audible.
Yeah. So one thing is that one very first question is that when it comes to acknowledgement, we're not taking acknowledgement separately out of.
Yeah.
We just get a sign at the end of the KFS that okay, the borrower has understood the terms and conditions very well, and it is okay that he has agreed. Apart
Right.
from that, second question is that like there is a date that needs to be given on KFS. Okay, what guidelines says that when loan is more than 7 days, the KFS validity should be 3 days, and when the
Yeah.
loan validity is like it is 1 day, the KFS should be valid for sorry,
Right.
when the loan is
One
valid
day.
for
One day.
like
Correct.
yeah, 1 day. We are also not giving a date on KFS, so just need clarity on what
Sure.
about the with regards to date on KFS? Yeah, and unique
Sure.
proposal number as well.
Sure. So unique. So I'll cover the second question first because that's a more
Sure,
straightforward
sure,
answer. Then I'll cover the issue of separate or combined acknowledgement. So with
sure,
regard
sure.
to validity period, if you look at the KFS guidelines, it's not a maximum validity period. It's a minimum validity period. So if it exceeds the 3 days, that's fine. Ultimately, what that validity period is about is that if you give the KFS to the borrower, you cannot force the borrower to then and there accept or reject. If the borrower says that I want to take some time, you have to give them a minimum of 3 days if the loan tenure is greater than 7 days, and a minimum of 1 day if the loan tenure is less than 7 days. So ultimately, you can give the date of KFS and it's okay if they accept after 3 days also. It's the fact is ultimately you can't, it's to just prevent coercion of the borrower that he signed this accepted right now. You can't think about it. Of course, the borrower can also choose to sign it on the same day. This is not saying the borrower can only sign on the 3rd day either. It's simply saying that the validity period must be at least 3 days. So the borrower has the option to think about it. It's only that. So you don't need to worry about like anything exceeding 3 days. Ultimately, it's up to you. We've seen most lenders actually offer a validity period of about 7 days, 10 days, which they used to offer for their loan agreements before KFS as well. So this validity period, you don't need to worry. It's just to ensure no coercion of the borrower instantly saying, if you don't accept this KFS now, I will withdraw the loan. So
Oh,
it's a
actually,
safeguard against the borrower.
there was some mix up with regards to the sanction letter. That's why the confusion was there.
Right. Yeah, so don't worry about it. Ultimately, it's a KFS validity period from the date you issue the KFS. So if you made any change to the KFS, that validity period will kick in from the fresh KFS. So just remember that. That's the only thing to
Oh,
keep in mind. So if any terms of sanction have changed and you change that in the KFS, the validity period will kickstart from the date of the fresh updated KFS. But ultimately, validity period, we've seen 99% of lenders don't find an issue because they anyway give the borrower about 5 to 7 days in most cases. All right. So this 3 days is definitely met. It's simply a borrower protection to protect against coercion at the stage of this, like at that stage saying, I force you to sign it now.
got it.
The first question, right? Collecting separately or together, as I mentioned to you, I can give you what we think and I can give you the reasons for what we think. And I can tell you what some other lenders are doing. But ultimately, I cannot give you a yes or no that you can take back. Your compliance team has to do that. If you're in the compliance team, you will have to do that. What we think, our reading is that the KFS has to be understood by borrower, and that understood is evidenced by the acknowledgement before execution of loan contract, right? So for that, the acknowledgement necessarily needs to be taken before the e-sign, not together, right? So that's our view of it. You could say it's a cautious view, but ultimately we will never recommend a less than cautious view when it comes to a regulation, and there's no explicit guidance from the RBI on this, right? Although we've seen many lenders collect all of it at the same time, where they collect, say, a click wrap acknowledgement on the KFS, and then the KFS and loan kit together are e-signed together. We've seen this happen. It happens. Ultimately, it's the risk appetite of your compliance team that determines this, right? There is no like black and white answer I can give. I can only give you what we think. That you do need to collect a verifiable acknowledgement before execution of the loan contract. We've seen lenders collect that via way of a common e-sign together because that's the call their compliance teams have taken. What we've also seen is in a branch-led flow, a lender often takes the e-sign together because the explanation has happened in the branch, and in a digital flow, they take it separately. But again, that's just a way one lender is doing it. Ultimately, it's a compliance call you need to take. I've given you the reasons. Unfortunately, beyond those reasons, I cannot give you a legal opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Satish, I've given you mic access. I think you also had another question in the Q&A box. So I've given you mic access, and I believe your question was about a deposit taking NBFC doing a loan against fixed deposit. Your product is a loan against fixed deposit product. Am I correct in my understanding of the question, like whether KFS applies to that product? Yes, Satish, you can talk. You're unmuted also. Cool, must be facing some mic issues, but Satish, I'll take your question that's there in the Q&A box. Maybe you can unmute and mute and unmute again. The question was ultimately there's a deposit taking NBFC with a loan against fixed deposit product. Do we need a KFS for that? It's ultimately a credit line product, right? It's a drawdown they can do from the fixed deposit. It's not a disbursal that goes, right? So as I mentioned to you, I cannot again issue a legal opinion that you can follow, right? I would think that ultimately, is that classified as a term loan by RBI? If it's not classified as a term loan by RBI, then no, you don't need a KFS. In our view, a credit line fundamentally differs from a term loan. But again, ultimately, honestly, this is a call your compliance team needs to take. Maybe you need to ask RBI for a clarification on this. In market, we've seen lenders do both. We've seen lenders say that's a credit line, it's not a term loan, so we're not going to do KFS. Lenders say, hey, out of abundant caution, I am going to do a KFS anyway. So if you have any inkling of doubt that while a credit line is different from a term loan, maybe RBI will classify this as a term loan, then just include a KFS. So answer is again not a satisfactory answer for you, probably not in our understanding. But at the same time, we've seen lenders actually include a KFS with such products as well out of abundant caution. Ultimately, it determines on whether your internal compliance team has taken a call that a credit line falls under term loan or not, right? So our view is that it does not, but ultimately that's our view. It's not a objective binding view. What is a binding view is that look, MSME term loan, retail term loan is there, credit card loan is not there, corporate non-MSME loan is not there, right? These things we can confidently say. For this, we can just give you our view. Ultimately, it's a call that you need to take. You're still unmuted, so you can ask any follow-up if you want. Otherwise, what you can probably do is I can disable talking for you and re-enable it. Maybe that's will solve the issue. So I've disabled talking for you. Now I'll re-enable it for you so that maybe that will fix the mic issue. Actually, just wait. Yeah. Yeah, Satish, now can you try and unmute and talk? I've given you mic access again. By the way, for a lot of these questions, Satish, if you can try again, because earlier you were unmuted, but we were not able to hear you. Now you're not able to unmute. I am unmuting you. I have trying to unmute you. It's not unmuting for some reason. Let me try. Right. So I'll just answer your question because you've asked that follow-up in the Q&A box. Is sending back the signed copy of KFS to borrower mandatory? The answer is yes. Because ultimately the final KFS, which is obviously the acknowledged copy, ultimately that is what the borrower has to hold lenders to account, and that's the intent of the RBI. So the final KFS that was acknowledged has to be given to the borrower. Only then will full transparency be ensured. Only then will the actual functional purpose of the KFS be ensured. By the way, for a lot of these questions, we will also be preparing a small FAQ Q&A based on questions asked here. So we'll be providing these answers in writing as well. So if you missed out on any of my answers or you had to leave, we will be providing that. Or you have to leave now, we will be providing you an FAQ document with answers. So wait, there's a lot more questions going to answer it. Some in the chat box, some in the Q&A box. Right. So one question in the chat box is, how can you ensure vernacular language if it's not digital? So the answer to that honestly is that you need to look at your branch location. You need to take a guess on what languages will happen in this branch and have those templates ready at the branch. Another option is you just have, if at the branch the template is being printed out at the moment of the borrower walking in, you have all the templates in all languages available. You ask the borrower what language they want it in and you print that specific template out, right? So here the instructions to the branch and the SOP at the branch and implementation of that SOP at the branch will be super, super critical, right? It all relies on the branch officer or the RM in a physical flow. Like ultimately, that's the single point of where this compliance will be ensured or not. You may have the templates online, branch person has to print it. Ultimately, whether they print it or not is what you need to ensure. Otherwise, you can just ensure that those physical printouts are available in a few languages of the city that or state that you're disbursing in. But ultimately, you realize that this is not fully foolproof because there can always be someone who doesn't understand those common languages that you, especially say in disbursement in metros. The other question is Aadhaar OTP mandatory for signing a loan agreement, or can you proceed with virtual sign? So now this depends, right? So if your loan product has a specific regulation which says that the agreement must be signed and the word signed or any similar word like signature is used, then you need to, if you're doing it digitally, you can only use an IT Act electronic signature, of which Aadhaar e-sign is of course the most convenient. For most loan agreements, though, there is no specific sign requirement. Lenders just choose to sign it because it's very convenient, because it's easy to enforce, right? But ultimately, for those loan products where there's no specific regulation mentioning sign, right? And you'll see most loans don't have a thing saying you must sign the loan agreement, right? There you can use any digital form of acknowledgement. Just ensure it's verifiable and auditable. All right, so you can see section 10A of the IT Act. You can refer to section 10A of the IT Act. On our website, we also have a bunch of compliance resources which you can use to evaluate these sign types. But fundamentally, only if there's a regulation which says uses the word signed, do you need to have an Aadhaar e-sign for digital execution. Otherwise, for most loan products, validity ultimately is fine with any digital acknowledgement. You need to, of course, evaluate it on the basis of your enforcement and compliance, like your enforcement priorities. Another question. We have two more questions. Just give me a second. Credit line on UPI, one question which you received before. Ultimately, that's dependent on, as I mentioned, do you deem it to be a term loan or not? So one final two-part question or three-part question is, one, is the KFS and agreement in a single document fine, or should we share it individually to the borrower? Second, is the APR percentage enough, or do we need to show illustration also? Third, is vernacular language KFS enough, or complete loan kit needs to be translated, right? So I'll answer these questions 3, 2, 1, right? So third question, is the vernacular language KFS enough, or is the complete loan kit needed to be translated? As far as the KFS guidelines are concerned, if you're strictly looking at the universe of KFS guidelines, then only the KFS needs to be in the vernacular language and you're compliant as far as KFS guidelines are concerned. But if you look at other RBI regulations, like say the RBI Fair Practices Code, if you're an NBFC, the RBI Fair Practices Code for NBFCs applies to you. There, your communications to the borrower, terms and conditions need to be in a vernacular language. So there, your loan agreement also needs to be in a vernacular language, not under KFS guidelines, but other RBI regulations. So if you're looking at purely for KFS guidelines, yes, only your KFS, but ultimately you may still need loan agreement to be in vernacular if you're looking at the entire universe of RBI regulations. So second question, is the APR percentage enough, or do we need to show illustration also? You need to show the illustration also. So we'll send this across with our post webinar email in the next 48 hours, but RBI has actually given illustrative examples of what they mean when they say illustration, right? In Annexure B and C of the KFS rules. We'll share links of this. You need to go that detailed as the RBI is going in Annexure B and C. Simple high level number is not enough. First question, KFS and agreement in a single document or separate? So one is KFS and loan agreement have to be there in the final loan kit. That is mandatory. That's there in the KFS guidelines, that KFS shall be included as part of the loan kit as a summary box. That is mandatory. The real question ultimately is, do you need to collect the acknowledgement separately or not, which I have answered, right? In our view, yes, that acknowledgement needs to be done separately and then an e-sign. The final kit ultimately still needs to have that final KFS. So the answer is actually both. You need the KFS to be acknowledged first, and you need a common loan kit which contains the acknowledged KFS and the loan agreement kit. Right, so that's all the questions answered, like asked in the chat box and Q&A box. If you have any more questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll be here for as long as you guys have questions. We'll of course also be sharing the FAQs with the post webinar email, which you should receive by Friday EOD latest, right? Probably earlier than that. Do look in your spam boxes. Sometimes mails do land up there because we are not in your organization. So do look there in case you've not received it. We will be sending out an email. It will come from a legality ID. You can just search for the word KFS showcase in the subject title. That's will be contained in our webinar, post webinar email subject title. And of course, we are going to be publishing a detailed KFS implementation guide with detailed technical flows, like detailed how-tos on how to build a digital KFS process, right? In way more detail than any webinar can go into, answering a lot of these questions on call and more. You can sign up for early access on our WhatsApp or email facility, where once a week, just once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks also, we send either a relevant regulatory update, a latest product or feature update, or a case study from another lender. We've received another question, so I'll answer that. Can you share the name of NBFC and bank who is penalizing for not executing vernacular language? I can't share the name, but this is publicly available information on the RBI website. I don't want to share the name. That would, I think, be unnecessary, because here we are ultimately looking at it in a spirit of what is the fact situation, what is the violation, how can we all prevent it. I don't want to get into the name game here, but ultimately it's publicly available information. We've not got a secret RBI message. Like, RBI publishes all this on their website, so you can obtain it from there. Don't worry, it's not. If it was your NBFC, you would know. But yeah. Cool. Any other questions? You can also raise your hand if you have any questions you want to ask on mic. Again, we'll be sharing the recording within the next 48 hours. We'll be sharing FAQs. We'll be sharing this deck as well. So don't worry. And of course, I've again left my contact details. So you can go to www.legality.com/KFS, or you can just go to www.legality.com. I'm typing it in the chat. That's why I'm speaking a bit slowly. If you just want to explore what we do, or you can reach out to me at aditya@legality.com, or you can connect with me. I'm Aditya Patel. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. If you want to connect, you want to ask more questions, you have any other very specific doubts, happy to connect and happy to discuss at leisure. Cool. If we don't have any other questions, let's end the webinar. Thank you so much. We have overshot time a bit because of great questions that were asked. So really happy. Hope this webinar was useful to you.